It was one of those late afternoon storms that seemed to come out of nowhere, the kind of sudden downpour that soaked you through in seconds. Roy had just finished his shift at the auto shop and was heading home, looking forward to a quiet evening. He drove through the winding roads of his small town, his headlights cutting through the sheets of rain that blurred everything beyond his windshield. It wasn't the kind of day you expected something unusual to happen, but life had a way of throwing curveballs when you least expected it. As he approached the turnoff to his street, he saw her, a woman standing on the side of the road, huddled under an umbrella that did little to protect her from the relentless rain. She was holding her purse close to her chest, her head bent low against the wind, and she looked completely out of place, alone in the storm. Roy hesitated for a moment, but only for a moment. He wasn't the type to leave someone stranded, especially not in weather like this. He knew what it felt like to be stuck. He had been on the receiving end of kindness when his car broke down a few months ago. Without a second thought, he pulled over beside her, rolling down his window. "Hey there," he called out over the roar of the rain. "Are you all right? Need a lift somewhere?" The woman looked up, startled at first, but her eyes softened when she saw Roy. She was younger than he expected, probably in her late 20s or early 30s. Her wet hair clung to her face, but despite the downpour she managed a faint smile. "Would you mind?" she asked, her voice quiet but thankful. "I'm not sure how much longer I can stand out here. My car broke down a few miles back." Roy nodded immediately. "No problem. Get in. I'll take you wherever you need to go." She hesitated for a moment as if unsure, but then she quickly stepped into the passenger seat, grateful for the warmth inside the truck. Roy adjusted the air conditioning and gave her a few moments to settle in as he took off down the road, the sound of rain pattering against the truck's roof filling the space between them. "Thank you," she said, brushing wet strands of hair out of her face. "I don't know what I would have done. I was starting to think I'd be stuck here all night." "No need to thank me," Roy replied, his tone casual. "I've been in your shoes before. A little help never hurts." She looked at him, a hint of curiosity in her eyes. "I'm Erin, by the way. Erin Taylor." "Roy," he said, offering a quick smile. "Roy Carter." They exchanged a few words about the storm, the usual small talk, but as they continued down the road, Roy couldn't help but feel a sense of ease with her. There was something about the way she spoke, the genuine gratitude in her voice, that made the whole situation feel different. It wasn't just that he was helping someone, it felt like something more, something deeper. But Roy couldn't put his finger on it. As they neared her apartment complex, Erin glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. "I know it's probably not much, but I really appreciate this. Most people wouldn't stop for a stranger in the rain, especially not after a long day." Roy shrugged, glancing over at her. "You'd be surprised. Not everyone's in a rush to get home. Besides, it was the right thing to do. Don't worry about it." She smiled again, but this time there was something more in her eyes. A softness. "Still, it means a lot. I'll make it up to you somehow." Roy didn't know why, but her words stuck with him. There was something in the way she said it that made him think this wasn't the last he'd see of her. He didn't know why he thought that. Maybe it was just the rain, the quiet calm in the truck, or maybe it was something else altogether. Either way, they both exchanged goodbyes as she stepped out, her silhouette disappearing into the building just beyond the parking lot. Roy drove home that night, the rain continuing to fall in sheets, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. It wasn't just a simple ride, it was a connection, brief but meaningful, between two strangers who had crossed paths by chance. And for reasons he couldn't explain, it stayed with him long after he parked his truck in the driveway and turned off the engine. The next morning, Roy woke up to a bright, clear day. He stretched, made coffee, and began his usual morning routine. The thought of Erin crossed his mind briefly, but he dismissed it. It had been a fleeting interaction. He'd helped her, and that was the end of it. Life moved on, and so did he. Or at least that was the plan. That was until he stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. Hovering just above his house, a helicopter's blades sliced through the air, cutting the silence of the morning. Roy squinted up at it, his coffee cup frozen in his hand. The helicopter circled once, twice, then hovered directly above his driveway. "What the hell?" Roy muttered under his breath, staring up at the aircraft as it slowly began to descend. It wasn't just any helicopter. It was sleek, black, and brand new, the kind of helicopter you'd see in movies. Roy stood there, blinking, wondering if he was still asleep. His phone buzzed in his pocket and he fumbled to pull it out, unsure of what was happening. "Hello?" he answered, his voice uncertain. "Roy Carter?" a calm, authoritative voice asked on the other end. "Yeah, this is him," Roy replied, still staring up at the helicopter now hovering just feet above the ground. This is Robert Jansen from Taylor Enterprises, the voice continued. I'm here on behalf of Erin Taylor. We've arranged a flight for you to meet her. Roy felt his stomach drop. Wait, what? Erin Taylor? The woman I gave a ride to yesterday? What is this about? She's asked that we pick you up. We'll be landing shortly. Please be prepared. Roy stood frozen in the driveway, his mind racing. Erin? She had sent a helicopter for him? This couldn't be real. Yesterday she had been a stranger stuck in the rain, and now here he was standing on his driveway watching a helicopter land. His heart thudded in his chest as the helicopter touched down with a soft thump, its rotors slowing to a stop. Before he could process what was happening, the door to the helicopter opened and out stepped Erin. She was dressed in a tailored suit, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She looked every bit the professional, the complete opposite of the soaked, tired woman he had helped the day before. Roy, Erin said with a smile, stepping forward. I hope you don't mind the surprise, but I wanted to thank you for yesterday. And I thought this would be a fun way to do it. Roy gaped at her, unable to speak for a moment. You sent a helicopter? She nodded, her smile never wavering. I did. I figured a ride home from work didn't quite compare to what I could offer. This is just the beginning. I want to show you how much your kindness meant to me. He stood there, still in shock, his mind trying to catch up with the surreal turn of events. I don't understand. This is too much. Erin took a step closer, her eyes soft with understanding. Roy, you gave me a ride in the rain when no one else would. And that's the kind of person I want to surround myself with. I want to give you the opportunity to experience a bit of what you've been missing. Roy's heart pounded as he looked from Erin to the helicopter, to the incredible opportunity unfolding before him. I didn't expect any of this, he muttered. I know, she said, her smile growing wider. That's why it's so special. As the helicopter's door closed behind them and they ascended into the sky, Roy couldn't help but feel that this was the beginning of something life-changing. What started as a simple act of kindness, a ride in the rain, had led him to a world he never could have imagined. And as the city shrank below them, Roy realized that his life, just like the storm that had brought them together, had been completely transformed. The helicopter was gone by the time Roy had finally managed to gather his thoughts. His feet still rooted to the spot in his driveway, his mind spinning. He had barely been able to comprehend what had just happened. A helicopter? For him? And Erin, she was the last person he ever expected to see in such a scenario. She had been a stranger yesterday, someone he'd helped out of the kindness of his heart, yet here she was, turning his life upside down with nothing more than a brief interaction and an overwhelming gesture of generosity. Roy stood there, staring at the empty sky, trying to shake the feeling that he had somehow stepped into another world. He hadn't expected any of this. The simple act of offering a ride to a stranger in the rain had led him to a day he would never forget. But what was the meaning behind it? Why a helicopter? Why him? He made his way back inside his house, his shoes squelching slightly from the remnants of the rain he'd walked through earlier. He still couldn't shake the surreal feeling, the overwhelming rush of thoughts and questions that flooded his mind. He tried to make sense of the situation as he sat down on his couch, still holding the phone in his hand. Roy leaned back, running his hand through his hair. Everything had been so normal yesterday, so ordinary. He had just finished his shift at the auto shop, looking forward to the peace of his usual routine, when he'd seen Erin standing there, drenched in the rain. Helping her had been a no-brainer, but now, it felt like his life was anything but ordinary. The small acts of kindness he'd practiced throughout his life were starting to ripple out into something far bigger than he could have ever anticipated. Was Erin part of some high society life? Her presence in that helicopter, the way she spoke, the elegance in the way she carried herself, it all seemed to point to a world far removed from Roy's quiet, modest existence. And yet, she had chosen to thank him this way. He needed to process it, to understand what this meant. The next morning came with a calm that he hadn't expected. Roy had stayed up far too late, trying to wrap his mind around what had happened. He had barely gotten any sleep, tossing and turning, questions spiraling through his thoughts. But now, as the early light filtered through the windows, the world outside seemed to have returned to normal. The birds chirped, the sun peeked through the clouds, and life carried on as usual, except for the fact that his life had just been turned upside down. Roy headed to the kitchen, making his usual cup of coffee. It had been his morning ritual for as long as he could remember. He needed something familiar, something to ground him. As he stirred his coffee, his phone buzzed on the counter, jolting him out of his thoughts. He picked it up, expecting a message from a friend or maybe a work-related text, but when he saw Erin's name flash across the screen, his heart skipped a beat. Roy, I know this is sudden, but I'd love for you to join me for lunch today. I'll be sending a car to pick you up. I can't wait to see you again. E. Roy read the message again, his eyebrows knitting together. Join her for lunch? He'd barely gotten over the shock of yesterday, and now she was asking him to meet her again, this time for something that felt much more formal, much more personal. His fingers hovered over the screen, unsure how to respond. But after a moment of hesitation he typed back, Erin, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure if I'm ready for that yet. His thumb hovered over the send button, but before he could press it, another message arrived, this one a little more casual but still carrying the same invitation. I understand, Roy. No pressure at all. But I just want to make sure you know that I'm truly grateful for your kindness. It wasn't just a ride, it was something that really made a difference to me. Please take your time. I'll be looking forward to hearing from you. Roy leaned back in his chair, the weight of her words sinking in. There it was again, that sense of gratitude in her voice. It wasn't just about the ride, it was about something deeper, something that connected them in a way he wasn't sure he understood. He thought back to the evening before, the way she had looked when she stepped out of the helicopter, dressed in that crisp suit, her posture confident but warm. She hadn't felt like the person he thought she would be. She hadn't seemed aloof or distant, despite her obvious wealth. Instead, Erin had seemed genuine, down to earth, as if she truly cared about what had happened the day before. But now, as the fog of confusion began to lift, Roy's sense of caution returned. Why would she want to meet with him again? She was a woman who seemed to have everything. What could he possibly offer her in return? He wasn't a man who moved in the same circles she did. He was just an auto shop mechanic, a regular guy who fixed cars for a living and kept to himself. Yet, here she was, offering him lunch, sending a helicopter to his house, and showing him more kindness than he had ever expected. As the clock ticked by, Roy continued to wrestle with his emotions. This wasn't just about one moment anymore, it was about an entirely new chapter, one that he hadn't seen coming. Should he go? Could he step into her world, a world that seemed so far removed from his own? Would he even be able to fit in? It was a question that seemed to hang in the air for hours. Finally, after much deliberation, Roy's fingers moved across the screen, typing out his response. All right, Erin. I'll meet you for lunch. But just so you know, I'm still trying to wrap my head around all of this. He sent the message, the words feeling like a step into unknown territory. Just as he hit send, his phone buzzed again. Great. I'll see you soon, Roy. Get ready for a fun afternoon. A fun afternoon? Roy chuckled to himself. He hadn't had a fun afternoon in years, let alone one with someone who seemed to live in a world he didn't even understand. But for the first time in a long time, the idea didn't feel so intimidating. Felt right. He closed his eyes for a moment, allowing himself to embrace the unknown. Maybe this was what it was like to step out of his comfort zone. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. He had no idea what the future held, but Roy knew one thing for sure. His life was about to change. Roy barely slept that night. The feeling of surreal uncertainty gnawed at him as he lay in bed, his eyes fixed on the dark ceiling. The storm from earlier had long passed, but the overwhelming sense of change still hung in the air. It had started with a simple act, helping a woman stranded in the rain, and now he was caught in the whirlwind of what seemed like a completely different world. A world where strangers flew helicopters to thank people for their kindness, a world far removed from his quiet, predictable existence. He hadn't heard from Erin since the messages earlier that day, but the promise of meeting her for lunch still lingered in his mind. He'd agreed, of course. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a thank you. But why him? Why this sudden, over-the-top display of gratitude? He'd helped her, yes, but surely there were plenty of people in the world who helped strangers in need. Why had she singled him out? His thoughts swirled, growing louder and more confused as the clock ticked away the hours. Was he making a mistake by accepting this offer? Was it just her way of giving back, or was there something more to this? The questions piled up one after the other, leaving Roy feeling more uncertain than ever. The next morning came too quickly, the sunlight streaming through his window a stark contrast to the restless night. Roy dragged himself out of bed, still mentally exhausted but determined to keep his routine intact. He brewed a pot of coffee and sat at his kitchen table, his fingers nervously tapping the side of his mug as he stared at his phone. The time was drawing nearer to his lunch with Erin, and with every passing minute, his anxiety only grew. The doorbell rang just as he was about to take his first sip. He froze. His pulse quickened, but he didn't move. Could it be Erin? Did she have someone pick him up? He glanced at his watch. It was too soon. But when he opened the door, there she stood, dressed in a smart, tailored outfit, her hair freshly styled and her face radiating warmth despite the early hour. "Good morning, Roy," Erin greeted him with a smile, her voice effortlessly calm. "I hope I didn't catch you at a bad time." Roy's mind raced, trying to piece together the unexpectedness of the situation. He hadn't expected her to show up at his house. He had assumed she would meet him somewhere public. But there she was, standing on his doorstep like it was the most natural thing in the world. "No," Roy replied, his words coming out quicker than he intended. "It's just, well, I didn't expect you to come here." Erin's smile widened, and she stepped into the house without hesitation. "I figured it might be easier this way. I wanted to make sure we had time to talk before we head to lunch." Roy stood there for a moment, his feet still rooted to the floor as the weight of her presence settled in. His mind couldn't fully process the situation, but there was no denying that something had shifted between them. It wasn't just the helicopter. It wasn't just the extravagant gestures, it was something else. Something about Erin felt different from anyone he had met before. She wasn't like the people Roy was used to. There was an elegance, a grace in the way she carried herself, but it was more than just that. It was the feeling that she saw something in him that no one else had bothered to notice. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said playfully, noticing his dazed expression. "It's just lunch, Roy. Nothing to be nervous about." "I'm not nervous," Roy muttered, shaking his head. "Just not used to all of this. All the attention." Erin gave a small laugh, her eyes warm and understanding. "I can imagine. It's a bit overwhelming. But don't worry, I'm not here to make you uncomfortable. I just want to say thank you. For everything." Roy's mind spun, but he forced himself to focus on the present. She wasn't here to intimidate him. She wasn't here to change his life completely, she was just someone who had found herself in a moment of vulnerability, and he had helped. It was as simple as that. Or at least that's what he told himself. "Let me just grab my coat," Roy said, his voice hoarse from the tension he felt. He moved to grab it from the hall closet, but as he turned back to Erin, something in her expression caught him off guard. It wasn't just gratitude, it was admiration, as if she were seeing him through a lens he hadn't considered before. He couldn't help but feel self-conscious. It wasn't that he was ashamed of who he was, but it felt like Erin saw him differently. She wasn't seeing just a mechanic, she wasn't seeing just a man who'd offered a ride to a stranger. She was seeing someone else entirely. A part of Roy that he hadn't let himself see. He shook off the thought, forcing himself to focus. There was no time for existential questions. There was a lunch to go to, and this wasn't just some ordinary lunch. It felt like the start of something that Roy couldn't quite grasp. As they stepped out of the house and into the car she had sent, Roy continued to steal glances at Erin, trying to figure her out. She was so composed, so sure of herself. She seemed to have everything in order, her life curated in a way that felt foreign to him. Everything about this was foreign to Roy, and it made him question what he was doing here in this situation with her. But then, as they drove through the streets of town, Erin turned to him with a smile. "Roy," she said, her voice light, "I really do appreciate what you did for me yesterday. More than you know." Roy looked out the window, the weight of her words heavy on his chest. "It wasn't anything, Erin. You'd do the same for anyone." She laughed softly, the sound easy and genuine. "Maybe. But not everyone does, Roy. You saw me. You helped when no one else would. And that, to me, means something." Roy was silent for a moment, unsure how to respond. The car continued to move, winding through the streets as they headed toward the restaurant. He could feel the walls of his world shifting, slowly but surely. He had always kept things simple, he fixed cars, he lived a quiet life, and that was enough. But now, it felt like he was standing on the edge of something much larger than himself. Finally, he turned to her, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't expect any of this. It just feels like too much." Erin smiled at him, her eyes soft but confident. "Sometimes the universe gives you more than you expect. And sometimes you just have to be open to it." Roy wasn't sure what she meant by that, but as the car slowed to a stop in front of the restaurant, he realized that this lunch wasn't just about eating a meal. It was about everything that had happened since yesterday, the kindness, the unexpected connections, and the feeling that his life might just be taking a turn he hadn't expected. As they stepped out of the car and walked toward the restaurant, Roy took one last glance at Erin, wondering just where this strange and beautiful turn of events would lead him. He didn't know yet. But he felt, for the first time in a long time, that maybe he was ready to find out. The lunch went by faster than Roy could have imagined. As soon as they entered the upscale restaurant, Erin greeted the maitre d' with a smile that had him immediately leading them to a private table in the back corner. The restaurant was nothing like Roy had ever experienced. The soft lighting, the fine silverware, and the hushed voices of the other diners created an atmosphere that was at once elegant and a little intimidating. Roy sat across from Erin, his hands awkwardly resting on the table. He had grown up in a small town where modesty was valued, where comfort was found in simplicity. But here in this restaurant nothing was simple. Everything about the environment felt polished, perfected, foreign in a way that made him uneasy. But Erin didn't seem bothered by any of it. She seemed right at home, gliding through the conversation as if they were just two friends catching up. She asked about his work, his interests, and his life, genuinely interested in getting to know him. Every time Roy spoke, she listened carefully, her eyes never leaving his, making him feel seen in a way he hadn't expected. "So, tell me more about the auto shop," she said, her voice light, her smile warm. "I've always been curious about how things like that work. It seems so hands-on." Roy shifted in his seat, a little more comfortable now that the conversation had turned to something he knew well. "Well, it's not glamorous," he said with a half-smile. "But I like it. It's honest work. There's something about fixing things, whether it's a car or anything else, that feels rewarding." "That's what I admire," Erin said, nodding thoughtfully. "You seem like someone who finds satisfaction in the simple things. A lot of people get caught up in the hustle, in the chase for more. But you found peace in doing what you love, no matter what that looks like." Roy felt a lump in his throat at her words. There was something about the way she spoke that felt genuine, something that made him feel seen in a way he hadn't experienced before. She wasn't just complimenting him, she was acknowledging something deeper, something that, up until now, had always gone unnoticed. "Thank you," Roy said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "That means a lot." The conversation shifted to lighter topics, and for the first time during their meeting, Roy felt like he was on equal footing with Erin. The nervousness that had consumed him at the start was slowly fading away. They laughed over shared stories about odd jobs, childhood memories, and the strange things people did in the name of convenience. Roy found himself enjoying her company more than he expected, and as the meal continued, he began to relax into the experience. After they finished their lunch, Erin smiled and leaned back in her chair, her eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity. "Roy," she said softly, "there's something I want to show you, but it's not just about lunch. It's about something more." Roy's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected her to say anything like that, and the sudden change in tone made him feel a little uneasy. Was this all part of the grand gesture? Was there more to this than he had thought? Erin stood up and motioned for him to follow. "Come with me," she said, her voice inviting. "There's something I want you to see. Something that might just answer all the questions you've been asking." Roy stood up hesitantly, his mind racing with a dozen questions. What could she possibly want to show him? Was this some sort of test? Was this all just part of her thank you for helping her yesterday? As they exited the restaurant, the soft hum of the city filled the air. Roy followed Erin to the curb, where a sleek black car was waiting for them. The driver stepped out, opening the door for them. Erin slid into the back seat with ease and Roy followed, still unsure of what was going on. As the car drove through the city streets, Erin remained silent, her gaze directed out the window, lost in thought. Roy sat there, his mind whirling. What had this all been about? Was this just her way of showing appreciation for his kindness, or was there something else at play here? Eventually, the car stopped in front of a large building, an office tower that towered over the surrounding cityscape. Roy's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't expected to be brought here. It was a high-rise building, clearly part of the more prestigious side of the city, a far cry from the auto shop Roy worked in. Erin stepped out first, holding the door open for Roy. He hesitated, then followed her into the building, his feet feeling heavier with each step. The lobby was grand, with marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, and sleek modern furniture that made him feel out of place. "This is where I work," Erin said, turning to face him with a small smile. "I know this may seem a little overwhelming, but I wanted to show you a different side of things." Roy nodded, still processing the situation. "I didn't expect this. Honestly, I didn't expect any of this." Erin's eyes softened. "I know it's a lot to take in, but I've been thinking about what you said about helping me yesterday. And I realized that what you do, what you represent, matters more than you know." She led him toward the elevators, and as they ascended, Roy's heart beat faster. He wasn't sure what was coming next, but he knew something big was about to happen. When the elevator doors opened, they stepped into an executive suite. The space was minimalist and luxurious, large windows with breathtaking views, a modern desk, and soft lighting that made the room feel welcoming but powerful at the same time. Erin motioned for him to sit, and Roy did so, still trying to keep his bearings. "Roy," she said, her voice steady, "I want to offer you something. A chance. I've been looking for someone who values hard work, who doesn't get lost in the noise of wealth and success. Someone who doesn't just go after the biggest paycheck, but who finds satisfaction in doing what's right. You reminded me of that when you helped me." Roy's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to make sense of what she was saying. "What do you mean?" Erin paused, her expression serious yet kind. "I want you to work for me. Not in the traditional sense, but I want to offer you an opportunity, something that could change everything for you." Roy's mouth went dry, his mind scrambling to catch up. Work for her? What kind of opportunity was she offering? "I'm offering you a chance to join my team," Erin continued, her eyes locking with his. "But not just as a typical employee. I want you to be part of something bigger, something that could change the way you see the world. I know this is a big leap, but it's one that could change everything for you." Roy sat back, stunned, the enormity of the moment slowly sinking in. A job? An opportunity with someone like Erin? He didn't know how to respond. This wasn't just a job offer. It was a chance to step into a completely new world. But was he ready for that? Could he leave behind the life he knew, the comfort of his routine, to take a risk like this? Erin watched him carefully, as though waiting for him to make his decision. Roy opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. He needed time. He needed to think. And yet, deep down, something inside him was ready to take that leap. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something far greater than he could have imagined. "Let me think about it," Roy said softly, looking out the window at the city below. The possibilities stretched out before him, wide and endless. It was a chance to change everything. And for the first time Roy was ready to embrace it.